She's here.
Okay, you're all set.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are recording, so.
My goodness, we got quiet just because we're recording. Hey, Pat.
Hi. Well, good morning. You waiting for more people?
Yeah, well, we're gonna wait a little. I don't want to start any earlier, but I'll start on People's time. When we start on People's time, we started 20 minutes ago.
Oh. Well, this weekend there is a free seed giveaway, which is the second one the University of Illinois Extension has done in Lake County. There were 1,000 people that came through last year.
Wow.
Faster gardeners have been saving seeds and other ones in the area. It's amazing for people come to get seeds to plant. It's a good thing.
Nice. Do you help out with that, Pat?
Well, last year our home and community education people, we actually provided snacks and things like that, and I helped with the traffic, just directing people where to go. I'm not helping this year, but it's going to be an amazing thing. So I can't tell you how many seed packets I picked up. Now, some of them may be a little older and all the seeds don't work, but a lot of them are really good. Some of them are leftover from companies that sell seeds, but they didn't sell them for the year.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely amazing. And you find the most unusual vegetables and flowers that you get. There's a lot of vendors there too, you know, with all related to food. And probably if you looked up about it, you could probably see it on the University of Illinois Lake County website.
Okay.
Anyway, it's kind of cool, and that the idea, the free seed giveaway is actually a pretty good idea, and put that in the back of your head for a food security thing, for people to say, hey, you ought to plant something somewhere, even a pot, you know, a couple pots around your house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and I hope some other people come in, and they usually do. I am Scott Teeples. I am the Oregon FCE president, and I'd like to introduce Shaundra and I apologize, Ziemann, and I'll let her kind of introduce herself a little bit when she gets started there. But I'd like everyone to just introduce themselves, and I'll just kind of go down my list here. Loretta, where are you from?
Prineville, Oregon.
Okay, and Pat?
I'm from Antioch, Illinois, which is adjacent to Wisconsin.
And I see Margaret, you're on there.
I'm from Yuma, Arizona.
And Barbara?
Honolulu, Hawaii.
Well, welcome. And by the way, they keep jumping around, so I might miss somebody. Bonnie?
Klamath Falls, Oregon.
Jane?
Hi, I'm in North Bend, Nebraska.
Cool.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, I was afraid I wasn't signed in well enough. So
And Leah?
Hi, I'm here. I'm from I'm currently in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. I'm a a manager of a library here. I live in Diamond Head, Mississippi.
Well, welcome. Linda Hanberry. I don't know if she can hear me or not, or she's muted. She's in Mississippi. Linda, I think it's Linda Nice that's on.
Yes, I'm from Oregon, from Amity.
Okay, and Benny's keep jumping around here. How about, is it Jeannie? How about Tony?
I'm from Oregon.
Okay, who did I miss?
Barbara.
Barbara.
Thomas.
Okay, some people are coming on. And where are you from, Barbara?
Barbara Thomas from Wasilla, Alaska.
Okay, we got them all covered just about this morning.
And
Okay, anybody else I missed?
This is Janine from Kansas.
Well, welcome, Janine.
This is
Anybody
Linda
else I
from
missed?
Kansas. I'm sorry. Linda from Kansas.
Well, welcome, Linda. Anybody else I missed? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Shaundra, and the time is yours. Don't go
Hi,
over
everybody.
don't go over 4
Hi.
hours.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, I'll try not to. Today it should be about maybe 30 minutes, and then we can stay on if you want to chit chat a little bit after. It's my pleasure to be here. I absolutely love FCE, formerly Homemakers. I've been an agent for 9.5 years. My name is Shaundra Ziemann-Bolinske, and I know it is a mouthful, I'll call it, but you know, I was in the Army for 14 years before I got married, and I just thought I could keep all my name tags if I don't, you know, change my name entirely. So I put both of them on there, and here you got to use both names. So it wasn't any easier. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll just drop the Zeman and go to Bolinske. But okay. So I am with North Dakota State University. Like I said, I was an agent for 9.5 years. Just in January, I took a new position. They believed in me enough to make me, they're grooming me to be a specialist. I need to finish my master's, which is in food science, and also a certificate in food safety. I'm studying at Kansas State because they have a really great program for food science, although I'm up in North Dakota, and they have a really great ag program at our university too, but just a little background. And actually some of this content came from my research, just interviewing for the new position that I started. And so I am the food systems coordinator, we call it. Some states are going to hiring a food systems expert. And in the case of North Dakota, we put it on the family and consumer sciences side. We call it family and community wellness. Those are kind of the agents that you would work with closely here with FCE typically. And really, I have a focus in educating the consumer, while some at universities have hired a food systems expert to educate the producer, so the farmers. And so actually today we're going to focus on the food system and where food security fits in so that we can understand some terms. As I understand it, FCE is placing a precedence on food security for the next 3 years will be a focus. So hopefully this presentation clears up some terms in industry, and maybe we can figure out where we fit in our help. Okay, so let's make sure that I can advance, and you might see the side of my face. I hope, can you see my presentation? That should be the biggest part of your screen, right?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start advancing slides now here, and we'll get to understanding some terms first off. Okay, so just to clarify some terms, you'll hear food safety. These aren't in any special order, but just to understand food safety, have you heard of this before? I'm guessing so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we place a lot of emphasis probably on some of your meetings that you've had, some of the lessons that you teach each other. Food safety is actually the unintentional contamination of food. This can happen in 3 or even 4. Let's focus on 3 ways that this can happen. So it's maybe I am somebody who produces sausage in a factory. I used to work at a sausage factory, so I think about it. And this could be maybe something accidentally was in a cut of meat that wasn't caught. And maybe there's a little bit of BB from beef. And so we have metal detectors at the end to catch, and that's called a physical contamination, something physically there, like plastic, like I said, metal, anything that's physically in the food. Also, there's biological. This could be, and we place a huge emphasis on understanding, listeria or salmonella. Those are living little microorganisms that we can't see. So of course it's unintentional when they potentially could get in the food, and food safety is really combating that. And then thirdly, we have chemical contamination, which could be, you heard during COVID maybe, where people were really sanitizing and disinfecting surfaces. And sometimes people use soap to wash their fruits and vegetables, which we don't recommend, because when you're trying to get any debris or nanoparticles off of the food product, sometimes we're using too much soap and don't get that off, and then we create a chemical contamination. That's why we recommend washing with just water and maybe a little bit of elbow grease in there, meaning physically brushing our foods. They have brushes to wash your fruits and vegetables, and some of our people even give them out as agents across the land-grant universities. So we have chemical, biological, and physical, and we're trying to prevent that accidental contamination. In addition to food safety, we have food defense, which is the opposite end of the spectrum, intentional contamination. And somebody might think, boy, that's terrible if somebody would intentionally try to contaminate our food. It does happen. It's not as often. We really focus on food safety because over 60% of contamination happens at restaurants or in our own home. But food defense is there. And it might be, I know there was a case years ago where a certain country in the world was trying to maintain the protein amount in baby formula. And so they found that they could substitute for a chemical that ultimately was a chemical that provided nitrogen, so maintain that high level of protein, but we found out it was actually hurting the little babies. And so a company, oftentimes intentional, is motivated by money. But we're really trying to get on top of that. So most governments across the world are monitoring the intentional. So understanding the difference between food safety and food defense here first. And these all boil down to what we call foodborne illness, which is eating contaminated food, basically. So once it goes into the mouth, it's then considered foodborne. And then an important term here, food security, right? That's why we're here today. I'm going to move this off my screen. Okay, so food security is really, in a nutshell, there's many ways to define it. But food security is really the availability of food. And actually, I'm going to share with you something. We have one food bank. Remember, I'm joining you from North Dakota. I'm right in the middle of the state, in the capital, Bismarck, today. And in North Dakota, we have one food bank. And so as you're working with understanding, and I bet a lot of you probably already volunteer at local food pantries. One difference, just pausing for a second and defining food security for you with an example. So the difference between food banks and food pantries, so that you're using it correctly when you're helping and volunteering. Food banks is where we distribute the food to, maybe the government, USDA is sending food packages to the food bank, and they distribute out to food pantries. So I used to use those terms interchangeably. The food banks want to be known as food banks. Food pantries usually don't care. So like I said, we have one food bank only in North Dakota, and that's Great Plains Food Bank. If you're looking in toward the end of the slides here, I'll have Feeding America. If you want to find a food bank in your area, Feeding America is kind of the central area place to go. So food security, one time I was at this is why I got on this subject. One time I was at a meeting and we had a lot of community members joining us. And there was somebody there from our food bank who was an employee. And she gave the best way to explain food security to me. That's why I give you this story. She said, really, it's just knowing where your next meal's coming from. So a lot of people are food insecure. They don't know when their next meal's coming. It was a great way of just kind of an easy way to explain it in conversation. Okay, so we have our next slide here, just a little bit more elaboration on what food security is. I'm going to give you the textbook definition now. So this comes from the World Health Organization. So this is all the countries of the world that are members coming together for a greater good. Food security is when all people have physical, social, and economic access to enough safe, and here's the key, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences. So just a couple notes here. And you know, while urgent action is needed to overcome the immediate state of food insecurity, so the opposite is security. When you're saying somebody's food insecure, they're struggling with food security. So you'll hear both terms. And it's urgent to ensure that they have food availability. It's also essential, and we're learning from lessons from the past, to prevent a narrow focus on just calories and just your next meal. We're actually taking it a step further now, and we want to make sure that we're providing adequate and nutritional balance to the food that folks are eating who are food insecure. So it's not just calories, it's not just a next meal, it's a balanced meal. And it's a high nutrient meal. And so that takes me to the My Plate. Have you seen this? Yeah, just feel free to unmute. A lot of us are unmuted already. Have you seen My Plate before?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I'm hoping so. My Plate is actually, it came about every 5 years. They talk about the nutritional meal patterns. And so it was just updated here in last year and the last couple of years again. And what I like about, because when I was a kid, it was like the food groups, and then it became my pyramid. And actually we have a specialist who's fantastic, Dr. Julie Garden-Robinson. A lot of you know her. She speaks on behalf of NDSU, often nationally at different organizations. Right now, she is the outgoing president of the National Association of FCS agents. So she wrote an article on what the My Plate looked like in the 40s. So it's been around, it just looks different. Today, what I like about My Plate is that it's really intuitive. It makes sense without even explaining it. I did put the explanation on the slide, but when you look at this plate, this is what your plate, this is how we teach, this is what your plate should look like every time you sit down to a meal. So half of your plate, every meal, we strive for it to be full of fruits and vegetables. The other half, it's about a quarter grains. And notice we say make about half your grains whole grains every day. And that's because of the fiber content and other reasons too. And then vary your protein routine. And so we used to say lean with protein, but actually just vary it up, whether it's plant-based or animal-based. And then of course we have the dairy, the calcium-rich foods up in the dairy. So it's just nice because you can think about, okay, every time you sit down, does about half my plate have, is it full of fruits and vegetables or not? And if not, we suggest you get a couple snacks in a day with 2 out of the 5 food groups. That makes a healthy snack. So maybe it's apples and peanut butter or a nut butter or something like that for a healthy snack. So high nutrients for food insecure folks, just like we strive to eat, that are not low income and low access. We'll define that here too shortly. Okay, so moving on, let's look at what we mean by food system. And this is really my rough definition. A food system can get as complex or as easy as you want it to be. And I'm going to break it down into 4 different steps. So we have production, which everything going into production, whether it's, weather, different technologies. I'll have a slide for each of these, so we'll elaborate here in a bit, but think about all the things that go into production. Processing, and I heard somebody talk about giving seeds away from master gardeners, saving them. That really could be a step in production, okay, because as you're growing. Processing, I use the example of, I worked at a meat producing plant. We produce sausage, hams, bacon, all kinds of different meats. Distribution. I used to think, before I really got into this and needed to wrap my head around the food system, I thought distribution was maybe a small chunk of the pie, and it holds its own in importance. If you can't get food, whether it's trucking or just locally to people, there is a break in the food system. So distribution and getting it out to consumers. And then consumption is a really big piece. This is where nutrition falls in. I might argue that food security is in every single sector here. I would say it's really affected by distribution, and in order to maintain the ability to consume it. So let's look at these a little closer here. So production, just some pictures that really say it all as it pertains to it. But what goes into production is a whole heap of knowledge. And, production directly relates to food insecurity when exploring the important factors such as agricultural practices, and that's really in general, technology, climate, access to resources. I have an example on here from one of our specialists on soil salinity. I mean, we have folks out there just focusing, and that's their whole PhD, their whole study and expertise on soil health. It's that important. And threw up here I'm just boasting a little bit for North Dakota. North Dakota is the #1 producer in several commodities, dry edible beans. You don't think of North Dakota being the leader in maybe pinto beans, but they're leading the way up here. A lot of beans grow really well in warm climates, but we've seemed to be able to master it up here. I'm really proud of our farmers in general, but just for really making that happen, because when you go back to the My Plate, there's an emphasis in bringing up your protein routine, and edible beans and pinto beans, all these different beans play a big role in those protein options being plant-based. So we have canola growers, flaxseed, honey's really big in North Dakota. Dry edible peas, wheat, many different types of wheat, including durum. What do we make out of durum wheat? Anybody know? It's
Is it
pasta.
spaghetti? Pasta?
Yeah.
Pasta.
Right. Good job. Yes. Okay, so let's move into processing. Processing is really, okay, so in general, the definition of processing is changing food from its original state. So even some people argue cutting would be a process. Of course, smoking, grinding. So once you go to change the food from its original state, you're processing it. And that could even be in the comfort of your own kitchen, right? So just a few different things that affect it. The economy is very much affected by processing of food and its availability. And we have different government organizations who make sure that we're being very careful so as to, like I said in the beginning, make sure that we don't have any of those physical, biological, or chemical contaminations. This is where right now, at least in the United States, we've really amped up our regulation to make sure that consumers are safe as it pertains to processing. So even producers on the growing side have to keep record of what they're doing, whether it's washing their fruits and vegetables or not for farmers markets. So that processing is a huge piece of this. And this is kind of where my background is a little stronger. So I'm a food scientist, and I used to actually I worked in industry at a Fortune 500 company who specializes in cereal, but it's a huge company now, and even down to the vegetables area. I used to do product development. So coming up with fancy ways to make things healthy, make things available. And then I was also a quality assurance director at the meat producing company. So this is where my background can help answer why our company is doing this, whatever this might be in the process. Let me make sure so food technologies are really big, making sure that actually, it's really hard, for example, to wash spices to make sure that they're safe. I had a organic chemistry teacher say he's surprised that black pepper is allowed by the FDA because it can be kind of dirty. And so actually, a technology might be using different rays of light, like infrared light, to chemically clean spices, just an example. So technology can fit in all of these steps, but particularly processing and production. Let's see. Okay, so moving on to the next step, which is distribution. This is just an example of how distribution can work. And so in the state of North Dakota, our local Department of Agriculture, and there's our ag commissioner's name too, they've created a local foods map. So maybe this is idea number one. Maybe hopefully as you listen, you're getting ideas of what your clubs can do, but maybe you look into what your local Department of Ag has available in showing availability of your farmers markets or where you can buy directly from a farmer. And so actually I was really happy to see that Bismarck, where I'm located, is a huge contributor right there, that number 32 circle. I just went onto this map, and you can use, you know what this is called in the bottom right? A QR code. So what you can do is you can take your cell phone, if you have a smartphone, not everybody does, but you can go and as if you're going to take a photo, and you can even do that right now. Maybe you have a cell phone, and I'm going to just show you mine here. I'm going to, like, as if I'm going to take a photo and something pops up, and I know it happens on iPhones. I'm not sure about other phones. And it says bit.ly for me. So a little yellow thing pops up, and I can click on that, and it takes me to the website where this is. So those QR codes, sometimes people don't know how to scan them. I just use like I'm going to take a photo, and it's embedded now into the updates of iPhones, and I think all smartphones, to be able to take you to this map. So I toggled all the
Android phones, a web link will pop up.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony.
Yeah, we got a web link to bit.ly/ND local foods. Oh,
Okay.
I got a question mark on our, but few things. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So it's working. You might have something in your state, and I am thrilled to see how many folks from different states are on this, by the way. So I'm definitely suggesting to work with, even though departments of ag are regulatory bodies, they often place a huge emphasis on education. So they might have maybe your local agent, if you work with your land grant university extension office, they might have a good contact up at your Department of Ag. Maybe they need help in volunteers going into classrooms, or, I usually have to do a background check for that, but they might have some outreach that they do. Maybe they need your help in sorting out papers, for example. So that's something you could do. And hey, might translate to helping in the realm of food security, because distribution is a piece of that, as well as education and the consumption side, which we'll get to. One more distribution slide here, though. Distribution really has to do with trucking and getting it to you. Access to school lunches, for example. One thing I really boast about what Homemakers did years ago, now FCE, of course, but it was Homemakers at the time. They were, and maybe some of you gals and guys had a hand in bringing food and school lunches to the children. But remember, that's our organization who lobbied in Washington to make that happen. I'm really proud of that. And so that last slide that I had, there's a big effort in North Dakota being able for farmers, approving farmers to sell directly to the school lunch program locally. Maybe you can work on helping with that effort. Okay, so a little bit more about food distribution as it pertains to food security. There's a term loosely called food deserts, and I have given a definition up here, but occurs when residents don't live near a market or retailer where they can get affordable and nutritious food. And oftentimes this is coupled with rural access. What I do want to show you, let's go to this is kind of a busy slide, but I'll talk you through it. So on the top right up here is the top 10 states, the LILA or LILA states, the low income, low access states. That usually has to do with, and it's really how USDA defines a food desert. So the top 10 states, a couple of you were on from Mississippi. So Mississippi is one of the top 10 in terms of not necessarily the number of people who live in a low access or aren't necessarily low income, but the percent of the population is very high. Okay, so in terms of number of folks that are low income or low access, it's actually a percentage base. So Texas has the highest number per se, but on a percentage basis, Mississippi's leading the way in a need for help with food insecurity. I hope I made that clear. But Mississippi, just feel free to ask questions or chime in. Mississippi, New Mexico, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas is about the middle there in terms of percent of state population, low access, low income areas. We've got South Carolina on the map, Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma. Now, I really like this USDA map on the left. Did we have a question? Okay. I know sometimes it takes a minute to unmute too. So
just a surprise on the map, would you address up in Maine? Or tell us about the green versus blues.
Okay, getting right to that next here. So this is a USDA map. So the website on the bottom left here, USDA.gov, and they call it their Food Access Research Atlas, or FARA. And this map was most recently updated in July of 2023. I'm going to mute Cynthia here. Sorry, Cynthia, if you want to talk, just unmute. Okay, so I was going to say the green areas are considered food deserts by USDA. And so in Maine, you've got it must be pretty rural. Maybe a lot of people don't live there. So your local grocery stores may be struggling to keep up with, most likely it's distribution in that food system from those 4 parts. So remember, we have production, processing, distribution, and consumption. And so we're focusing on getting the food to those folks that live out there. And then it might be coupled with, they may be low income. So it's not only an access piece in terms of miles, it may be a monetary thing. And that is what why we have a focus for the next 3 years on helping with food security. It's a complex issue. So the green areas, low access in terms of miles, and it also considers low income. I just want to share that in North Dakota, there is because I know the area here in the middle of the map, there's an overlap often with our food deserts, the green boxes, with where our Native American reservations are. So,
Mhm.
you know, you may want to focus on a specific population and helping your effort. I know that we do in my family, we help often as much as we can in different reservations. So that could be the case. It'd be neat for you to maybe take this link, and all you have to do is just Google USDA Food Access Atlas. You'll find it. And you can maybe blow the map up. This is just a snapshot of it, and really focus on where your area is in your state, maybe where your clubs are. Let's see here. And you know, the FARA, this food desert map is in the year 2020 here. So just, it's a few years ago now, but it is fed by census tract information. So we were really struggling in 2020 because the census came up and we had, of course, a pandemic going on. And what happened in our country, fortunately, is most of the country was given free lunches. So folks were not filling out their paperwork if they were food insecure, low income. They were not filling out their SNAP Ed paperwork, which I'll explain here in a minute. And so we were not getting accurate counts. I think that's come back around. But if you're ever speaking with a group of individuals, that census information is so critical, because it's what brings, it's not just about population, it's what brings the programs to your area. So if you wanted to, you might, maybe it's not an obvious direct, you know, an obvious impact that you're making with food security. But if you're helping in your area by knocking on doors to get the maybe transportation insecure folks to do their census, you're actually helping with food security by bringing the census to them. Some states do a census every 3 years, every 5 years, but the national's every 10. It's the big one. Okay, just a couple examples of consumption that you might not think about right away. Consumption has to do with eating your food, consuming your food. And see, these are some hot topics driving today's food system. Pesticides, I put a big red X up there because the clean 15, the dirty dozen, as it pertains to pesticide residue on your food, is actually a third party, not necessarily the government saying that these foods are safe or unhealthy. There is and I deal with this as the food systems coordinator. I get topics about, okay, is there chemical contamination from pesticides on my food? The EPA is our government organization that oversees this effort, and they have an annual. So just recently, last fall here, the 2022 results came out. So it's about a year behind to thoroughly do the research and they test like hundreds of samples of food to see if they can still find residues of any herbicides, insecticides. The overall umbrella term is pesticides on our food. And usually there's only 1 or 0 outliers that may have a higher parts per million remaining on their food. The EPA sets they do a good job, I think, of setting the lowest tolerance. And usually it's food that's imported that might be in violation. There are anomalies, but for the most part, our system is pretty clean from chemical contamination of pesticides. Just monitor it. I worry when people think only about the clean 15 or the dirty dozen. It is not a government agency. So just be careful of the source. We know that in FCE to watch the source. If you're looking at a source, the .gov, like up here, the EPA.gov websites are credible, and the .edu, meaning the universities, are credible websites. So I would watch for those. Sometimes .orgs. The .coms, usually they have to pay for that website, so they usually have some type of agenda. Okay, so food sensitivities and allergens you'll hear about. So I just threw it in here, understanding this is on the side of consumption. So since you hear about celiac disease and gluten intolerance, actually in our country, only 11% of the entire population needs to pay attention to gluten. Gluten is just a really popular subject. I appreciate that it's out there though, even though it's a small population that is concerned, we care about them. And I think that you'll go to a restaurant and often see gluten-free options. I appreciate that it's in the press for the sake of being sensitive to the folks who have to worry about it. I bet it's really difficult to navigate when you have an allergen or a food sensitivity. And so that's why I appreciate hearing more about it now than we used to. I was actually going to focus my master's studies on the prevalence, but it got a little too away from food science, more into the food and immunology medical side. So I decided to gear off and not necessarily focus on it, because I get the question a lot, why do we have so many more allergies out there? And you can't even take baked goods into a classroom anymore, for example. And
Right.
right? I
Right,
mean,
you can't.
yeah, and it seems sad. What I appreciate is that we're protecting those who may have a very intense allergy or sensitivity. An allergy, for an allergy, let me just define that your body cannot handle a specific protein. And so actually in 2023, for years, we were the big 8. We had 8 allergies. Now we have a 9th one. Does anybody know what it is since 2023?
No.
Does anybody? Well, let's take a step back. What is an example of a recognized allergen that has to be?
Nuts.
Yeah.
It's
Dairy.
Dairy.
Yeah. Tree nuts,
tree
Yeah,
nuts,
tree nuts,
eggs.
yeah.
dairy, eggs. Yep. Let's see if we can get them all.
Peanuts.
Okay, so that's with the tree nuts. Yep. So how about?
Peanuts are not tree nuts.
No.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
I'm sorry. So
they're
peanuts is
considered beans.
separate. Forgive me. You're exactly right. Yeah, forgive me. Peanuts is separate. And then we also have seafood. I don't think we said that, right?
Oh,
Right.
right.
No.
The new
Well, there's
one
also berries.
No.
Berries.
let me bring it up quick. I'm not tracking that berries is, but hey, I was wrong about peanuts there for a second. Allergens in US. Okay, so let me just rattle it off. It's milk, eggs, fish. We didn't say fish. So that's fish with fins versus no fins, basically, which is shellfish. Tree nuts, peanuts on its own, wheat, and soybeans. And the 9th one is, drum roll, sesame seeds.
Really?
So there was just enough, the population, we now need to be sensitive to that too. This is kind of a scientific graph. Let's go back to this food sensitivities in the center of the slide. Food sensitivities, celiac. So when it comes to gluten, it is a sensitivity. It is not an allergen. But notice a healthy intestine, and I usually teach kids, it's kind of like you put your hand in front of your face and you want the dips in your small intestine to be really deep, like your fingers. And so it would be like making a fist. You no longer have that surface area of your small intestine to be able to work. It's gluten can be very irritating to the small intestine. So you then are not able to absorb nutrients the same. It's very serious. It can cause issues not only in the gut, but throughout your whole body eventually. And so to actually be diagnosed with celiac is one of several diseases that are related to gluten. It's just the main one. So there's others too, but it can actually, a lot of people with celiac disease say they have a lot of brain fog and inability to concentrate because that can relate to gut health. So really the only way that you can work with it, food sensitivity, is to avoid it. Or you just suffer. You suffer. It's not like an anaphylactic shock situation like an allergen could be, but you suffer greatly. Okay, so let's go to, I only have 2 more slides here, folks. So food security action, I'm just suggesting a couple things, but as I was talking, there were other ways, indirect ways that you can help with food security in your clubs. Okay, I want to mention about the SNAP Ed program. Every state in our beautiful country has a SNAP Ed program. And that stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Education. And it's federally funded by the Farm Bill. I'm not the expert here, so I don't want to say too much and say it wrong. But I do know that in our state, we call it the Family Nutrition Program and FNP. And we have FNP specific extension agents strategically placed often where those food desert, where that map was that I showed you, but we have them where they're low income and higher risk populations. So there is one here in Burleigh County where I live in North Dakota, and they also cover Morton County, which is across the river. And so I would suggest to connect with your SNAP educators in your area, because there are oftentimes a significant need. We actually currently, it comes and goes, the funding comes and goes, but we did have where we needed somebody who was a FCE member at the time, but she got a little part-time job, was paid a few hours to help us go into classrooms, carry all of our food samples. And she got paid a wage to come in and just be an extra set of arms as we're teaching, you know, my plate to kids. So those SNAP Ed programs, and you might hear, you might be or recognize the old term food stamps. Okay, so those are SNAP Ed dollars now. So just an example of how to relate to the new term. One thing I really like to focus on is minimizing the stigma around populations who need SNAP dollars and those folks who are judging those folks that might need it. Really just normalizing that, because a 1 in every 6 people still are food insecure if they don't have those, or even with those SNAP dollars. So folks that need this are embarrassed to go and take it out. Let's work on normalizing that for the time being. Without our political agenda, we need folks to be food secure, and that's our agenda. 1 in every 4 people in North Dakota don't know where their next meal is coming from, even though we're like the top 10 in producing edible foods, right? So people struggle with that food waste piece and food security. Just another term that you might hear. So really it's that piece of educating so that people can, you know, maybe tugs at their empathy strings, if anything. Food banks. Okay, we talked about food banks. So food banks are the distributors to the food pantries. You might work at a food pantry. There's a possibility you work at the food banks, but it's usually the pantries that need the volunteers. So if you want to find your local food bank, Feeding America can help you. So find a food bank, but maybe your local faith-based organization or nonprofit knows where a food pantry is that you might help with or at. There are so many ways that you can. I mean, this is it here for the presentation. I really just scratched the surface. And so I think what I'm going to do is stop share at the end of this here, so we can see each other as we discuss. Took a little longer than I thought, but that's okay.
Can we get a copy of this program, of what
Sure.
you presented?
Yeah, you know, I told Scott I'd send it out, and so I'll just do that. I'll email it to him quick. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sometimes it's proprietary, but not this particular slide deck. Go ahead, Pat.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. A couple of times more near the end of your presentation, actually the last thing you talked about food, just a quick mention of food waste and food insecurity and how that food waste might be contributing to part of this. If there's some kind of correlation there, maybe you can expand on that. And I also wrote myself a note about freezers and refrigeration. If that ever comes into this picture, or only rarely, or something like that, just something as simple as that. Perhaps it's just education about not wasting food, even if you have a refrigerator or freezer. But the quality of things that are frozen is different than the quality of things that are fresh. Is that correct, basically?
No, what do you mean by quality? Because I appreciate, you are brilliant. These are really great. So tell me what you mean by.
Well, for instance, the taste might be a little different. If it's fresh corn, is that as good as frozen corn? Maybe frozen corn's better for all I know, because if you leave fresh sit around too long, it changes. So I'm just wondering about things like that, about freezers, refrigeration, and just having people to say, do you have these things? You already have them. How about using them?
Okay, I got a couple of things to mention here. Thank you so much for getting the dialogue going. The way that we teach an extension, it's across every state. I usually go once a year and work with the other state agents who did the same thing that I do in North Dakota, or did till this new job. We teach that however you can eat, whatever state that your fruits and vegetables are in, we suggest it, whether it's canned, frozen, fresh, what have you. And there's a few reasons for that, because we get into the misconception that one is better than the other. And an example of how frozen is actually oftentimes, when we say quality, you were kind of going on the side of sensory perception and like how it tastes. But I'm talking from a high nutrition, vitamins, minerals level. So oftentimes in industry, frozen fruits and vegetables are picked at peak ripeness or just before, so that they are good when they're thawed to be eaten. So particularly in a food insecure in terms of miles area, so a rural area, frozen is great because it was most likely picked at peak nutrition value before it was processed. And so by all means, whatever state you can get, particularly fruits and vegetables in, go for it. You do have to be careful when they're canned, if they're being canned in sodium or added sugar, like a high level of syrup or something. So I usually recommend that and a lot of our agents do, to get the no sodium added. Usually those cans are a little closer to the bottom. No sodium added green beans, for example, or in its own syrup, or no sugar added applesauce, So that was one thing that you had mentioned. Now let's go back to the refrigeration. That is a piece in distribution that is major. And so what I want to tell you folks is that there's a national effort, particularly in the rural areas, because somebody had mentioned Maine, right? Or no, that was the map.
Yeah, I mentioned Maine, yes.
Okay.
Pat did.
Yeah, Pat. Okay. And you're Pat. But so like Alaska, every area you saw has rural or every state has some rural areas according to that USDA map. And I'm looking over my other screen. We have somebody who came and spoke to us last fall at our extension conference. Every state has a conference where you come back together and you learn about what's available. And USDA has a USDA rural development grant that if you have a small, feel free to call your local rural development people, because they're there. And one thing they did for a small little grocery store up in the northeast part of North Dakota is they bought them a couple of refrigerators. And it's as simple as that. So it could be, because that is really hard to find, freezer and refrigerator space. I think you had said that. So there's funding out there to make this possible, and that addresses the distribution piece and consumption piece of the food system for food insecurity. I wanted to say one more thing in response too, because I wrote a couple notes down about your comments, and then we'll get to Tony's question. Food waste. I recently, and it's a thing for sure. And by golly, there's a couple good YouTube videos on it I had to watch for my schooling. And I didn't think about bringing that up, but you can even just go out there, and I had my kids watch it because they have high access to food. They're so lucky. And so there's a little bit of waste going on. Like, my son takes the top of his burrito tortilla, rips that off, thinks it's extra, so doesn't want to eat it. And we talked about how that's food waste, And so there is a big misunderstanding right now of the dates on our food, whether it's use by, freeze by, right? Yep. So and that can translate to food waste. And so if we think that that is a die-hard date, maybe we'll throw it. A lot of us in FCE know that you can call your local agent, and there's guides out there in our extension universities to help us. You can push the envelope. You have to be careful with the general public. But you can push the envelope if if your eggs have been in the fridge longer than whatever the date is, maybe they're still usable. You can work it out based on these guides of how long you can keep it. It is dangerous to use your senses, your eyes and your nose and your mouth to double check if it's spoiled, because let me just give you from a food microbiology standpoint, give you a little science because I'm a scientist. But so it takes about 1 million cells of foreign bacteria. You have billions in your gut, right? But about 1 million cells of something to give you kind of what you don't feel good, or like food poisoning. I don't like that term, but so that's about 1 million. So 6 zeros. And your senses simply cannot start picking up spoilage until there's another 10 million cells. And that first sign of spoilage is slime, typically, if you talk to a food microbiologist. So I think of the slime that starts on like sliced meat, like lunch meat. And so there's just no way to be able to tell. And so I really hesitate, but I mean, certainly open your milk and smell it first, right? If you're wondering, but that's usually 2 logs more, 2 zeros more than your body can handle in the first place. But so that food waste, the government has not stepped in yet. FDA has not developed guidelines for companies to follow. And that's partly because of the distribution piece of the food system that we're talking about. If there's so many steps in the food system before your food gets to you, that can be abusive to the food product. So let's say you live in Arizona. Some of you joined from Arizona, and it's warmer in the car from the store to your house, and maybe you have to make another errand. That warm temperature has caused your food to spoil more readily than maybe in the winter, as I'm in North Dakota. So I appreciate that the consumers want some guidance. But the FDA, partly because of food waste, has stayed out of that specific realm. That's why you can work with, there's a little leeway between that use by or freeze by date. And notice it's not necessarily a use by. You can freeze things so that you're not wasting them if you can't get to them. That is a whole nother lesson. Thank you, Pat. Tony, did you have something?
Yes, I had a couple things. When I was writing, you were speaking on the food bank and food pantry. I just needed to know if I understood you correctly.
Yeah.
Food banks are distributed food, and the food pantry are food that's received from. They get food that's received from food banks or other people.
Okay.
Correct?
Good job. Yes. And thank you for bringing that up. I probably didn't give it enough of a definition.
No, I was busy writing previous stuff that you're talking. And I was trying to listen at the same time.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make sure. And then what you were just speaking on the guidelines and things about the spoil or food and sensory stuff. But were you just saying that there's no place to look up for how to where to see how to check food on and how to like some people say you could put eggs in water if they float, that
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and show you how I would check into this.
Okay, yeah. Mhm. 'Cause,
Okay,
like, I had some orange juice and it tastes like bubbly. I don't know if it's good or not, but I don't know how to check those things, for to see if they're good, if they're well.
right. Okay, so I don't necessarily have any of those tips. I mean, as like floating or bubbles or whatever, I would just go right to food storage guide. And then anytime that you folks want to get a good source out of it, there's actually an algorithm built into every search engine. If you put cooperative extension, it will bring up your extension university's information first, typically the top 3. And so we have a food storage guide in North Dakota. I bet other states do. Oh, here's Nebraska's. Here's Indiana's. This is the overall Center for Home Food Preservation. They give you the really good canning tips. This is run by Georgia, Colorado. Okay, so here's North Dakota, just because I know this one. So what I did was I put food storage guide, cooperative extension. I sometimes just write the word extension and it brings up extension university stuff. Okay. And then I bring up the PDF. And let's go to eggs, for example. It's taking a second, I don't know. Sometimes when I do this, when I'm on Zoom, it doesn't like it. It came up from this link, so I'm gonna use this. It takes a lot out of your video when you're sharing and doing a live search. Okay, so here's Dr. Gordon Robinson wrote this one here, and she keeps it up quite often. So it was reviewed a year ago only. And so then I'm gonna just do a search. Anytime you're in a document, you can do a Control F and see how it brought up this search thing here. So I'm gonna type eggs in. And that's the case with Word or any PDF or a website. You can do Control F and that helps you find things. So eggs, okay, eggs in a shell. And I'm gonna scroll up a little bit. Okay, let me get rid of this so it's a little bigger. And then I'm gonna zoom so you can see it better. Okay, so this, if it's pantry, then it's out. If refrigerator, of course, it needs temperature control as well as a freezer. So let's go back down to eggs. So this middle column for refrigerator is what I'm looking at. Okay. So you can keep them for up to refrigerator over here in this one. Sorry, folks, I was going to say, not the pantry. 3 to 5 weeks in the shelf. I think they're labeled for like 2 weeks from the store. I don't know for sure. 1 year frozen, but they talk about how to store them frozen, not just in the shell. See how you take it out of the shell and then it's whites or yolks for a year.
Does in the refrigerator that extends their life, does it not? If you refrigerate them the whole time?
Yes, as opposed to meaning out of the fridge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, in our country, in the US, some states have a requirement to wash your eggs before market. And when you wash off that bloom, which is the natural, it extends the life and protects the egg. That bloom is washed away when we sanitize the egg. So you have to keep your eggs in the fridge in our country.
Oh, thank you for the information.
Yeah. Great questions, Tony. Okay, go ahead, somebody.
Can I share some things I do, like with TV dinners? When they're kind of dried out, if you add some water to them before you cook them, they're much nicer to eat, because sometimes when they're on sale, they will be more dried out. Another thing is we've kept like the eggs about a month after the pull date. for making like deviled eggs or sandwiches or something that's eggs are boiled, but not past that. And if they at all have a odor, don't use them. And I mean, if the smell, you can tell when a egg
Yeah.
is spoiling. Another thing that I've done for literally years, and my daughter does, she carries an ice chest. We carry an ice pack, and if your car, if you don't have a trunk, you need to carry something to cover that, to keep the ice colder or the ice pack colder in your ice chest. By the way, frozen bread dries out real fast. Like if you're only keeping it even a month. My husband used to complain of the dry bread. And my solution, and this was probably 40 years or more, maybe longer than that, probably 50 years ago, I started dribbling a few drops of water with my fingers into the plastic bag, and I would make the sandwiches out of frozen bread, and by noon they were nice and moist. Let's see, there was some other things. Let me see if I can. On the milk, we got where we would always just pour the glasses of milk and then we'd put the milk right back into the fridge, because milk only has the max of 3 hours setting out. And if you buy at the store and you do not put it in an ice chest, that is going to shorten the amount of time you even have to keep your milk really cold and usable. And I don't know if I talk too fast or not, but
That's great.
I didn't know if any of those tips would help you, but there's things I did that I just learned to do, to make things taste better.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to say one thing. I love your points. I'm going to speak to the science of it now, because it's practicality. You figured it out. And then there's science and reasoning why it's working for you. I love it. It reminds me, I learned most of what I do from my grandma, and then I just went to school to learn why, and it just sounds like that's what you're doing. But I was going to say, it is 2 hours, not 3. I just want to make sure everybody knows it's the 2-hour rule for milk being out. Anything refrigerated or high risk, you get 2 hours, but you're close to. So I love that you take a cooler. Totally.
Well, back in my day, it was 3, but I'm glad to know about the 2 hours, because that really cuts down on your time, especially if you're a half an hour or an hour away.
Yes.
And you literally have to have an ice pack if you pick up yogurt or anything, because if you don't have it on ice, it won't hold.
Right.
It will spoil really quickly.
I think another additional point to that is on the eggs and the milk, is that some of these refrigerators that we have on the market, that we have in our homes, have the door shelves. And to store milk or eggs within that door also cuts down on the time in which that product is going to be viable, because the temperature change with the door, as opposed to having it inside the actual refrigerator, varies.
Right. They say not to even put it on the door, because the fridge mechanism is working from the back. So the door anything on the door takes longer to cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention on the TV dinners is sometimes, like on the corn or the potatoes, if you add some margarine or butter to it when you cook it, makes it taste better too.
Well, tell you what, you figured out. So when I worked at one of the big companies, there was my first boss ever, and this was 30 years ago when I joined the workforce. He said, if you understand water activity, you understand food science. And I now am starting to realize what he meant. But everything as it pertains to food is connected to water. And, ultimately, there's another term I don't like. There's two terms I really don't like, and we've covered both of them today. Food poisoning and freezer burn. They're not very scientific, but let's talk freezer burn for a second. Freezer burn is ultimately the migration of water moving out of your food. It happens even in the freezer. So when you open those frozen peas and there's all this ice crystal on the bottom, that's what we call icing out. And so that water has migrated, and often, even if you maybe just bottom, you can tell if there's a lot of icing out, if they have been freezer or temperature abused, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that bread that in the freezer, believe it or not, even though bread's considered, pretty dry, because you're baking out the moisture, all those little holes used to hold water, and now it's air. And, but still it definitely dries out in the freezer. So it makes sense that you're trying to incorporate it back for sense of quality. You just have to be careful. It's clean water, but yeah.
My nutritionist,
On the freezer burn, you actually, on your meat and things like that, you can take a knife and cut that out before you cook it, and it tastes perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Home Extension or OSU, we had lessons every year on food poisoning, and like when you cook like a casserole or things, they said max was 7 days, but it may depend on what you have cooked, whether it would even last 7 days. But that was the max on like chicken that's cooked or meat or anything, and depending on, now I used cooked chicken from a deli, or like 8 or 9 days, but you had better cook it additional and not eat it without putting it through the microwave or something. But I don't recommend it. I think that they were correct on 7 days max, because that's what, we had it every year. I can't even tell you how many years we had it.
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
nutritionist, my
Go ahead.
nutritionist also said, not only are we water, but we are organic also.
Mm.
I didn't hear what she said.
Say it
We
again,
are, we are organic also.
Oh, okay.
To remember that we are that, because I was saying one to him about how in California that they legalized that they can use their sewage water for treatable water, and I said that was gross, and he said, well, we are organic, and that just think, start thinking in that way, because the way that things are going, everybody's it might lead to where that everybody's gonna need to do that. And I said, well, I don't think that way. I think that that if we pray, God will deliver for the water, and so he will, things will be provided anyways. So, but it does give me an open mind to think that, what comes in goes out, that we are organic, because if illness happens and we can come through it, because, it is what it is, you know, we can make ourselves sick. We can make ourselves sick by our own mind, but we can also make ourselves better. So
I think another area of concern it seems like, yeah, if we do home cooking, like she was saying, is that it would be good in the refrigerator for at least maybe, 7 days out. But a lot of our people, our young people, are eating out. And considering that some restaurants seem to have big portions, you can't eat the whole meal, so you bring it home. Is how long is it safe to keep that food, that leftover restaurant food, in the refrigerator?
Well, here, let's look up, I think I looked up leftovers, meat leftovers, cooked poultry leftovers. It depends on if it has a high risk item. Each item is different. Sometimes it's 1 to 2 days. Sometimes it's 3 to 5. Okay, 7 days for bacon if it's opened. I would look up in this, I put it in the chat. If you're at all savvy, or maybe you can get the grandkids or kids to do it. Look up your foods one at a time, depending on what you're eating. I was gonna, what is it called? Stuffing, or we call it bread dressing. Oh, turkey. You only get 48 hours to eat 1 or 2 days. That poultry, because that's salmonella. But some of this indicates you have longer than you thought. So that's why it's good to hone in a little closer than just a general rule. Good conversation.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the comments.
I was going to,
Go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say, on the food that you bring home from the restaurant, you have to be careful if you're not going to, you don't want to leave it out. So you need some way to bring it home without it spoiling in a record time, and refrigerating it when you get it home too. So you have to be careful there.
Yeah. Yes, and just remember with your food thermometer, a lot of people call them meat thermometers. We call them food thermometers because we want you to use it in everything, not just meat. So anytime you go to reheat your leftovers, heat it to 165 and then let it cool off. Sometimes you put it in the microwave and you just want to do it just right, but that 165 kills anything that could have gotten there between the time it was made at the restaurant to when you're reheating it and eating it again, Linda. So thank you for that.
How long do you heat it?
Well, it depends on the item. Being a food scientist that working in product development, I learned a little bit about the technology of the microwave. A microwave is magnetron waves penetrating your food. It's just a wavelength of light, just like the light we see is a little faster. Magnetron, so it's light that's hitting your food and exciting the particles, and it doesn't go in any further than 1 inch. So you got to cut, like your lasagna, might be, you got to cut that whole piece into basically 2-inch slices, because it'll heat from this direction and this direction. Otherwise it requires, how the middle is always cold. It's 1 inch. Yeah. 2 inches total. And so I just heat to 165 in the middle. Yep. Go ahead, Linda.
I'm scheduled to do a program on beans at our conference, filling the beans on beans. And in my research, someone said, make sure you get your plant-based food from a plant and not in a plant. Not produced in a plant. And I thought those were good words.
Whoa. Thanks. I haven't heard that one either.
Great. Lots of good comments and lots of good questions. Yeah, anybody else have anything there? So I just want to.
Todd,
Yeah, go ahead.
did Oregon do a lesson on dates,
Yes,
buy dates or food dates?
Yes, I actually did that lesson, and I'm scheduled to do that at the national conference this year.
Okay.
It's entitled, How About a Date? No, I'm not asking any of you ladies out. I got my date right there on the screen there. And that is available. The lesson I wrote is available on the Oregon FCE website. If you go there, you can, and there's a PowerPoint for it if you need to use it or want to use it in your lessons. I don't remember whether I did this on one of the Zoom lessons or not. I'd have to go look at it, and I can't tell you offhand. Bonnie, do you remember?
I don't, Scott, sorry.
I don't remember if I did it. Well, I just want to thank Shaundra for being there. I've been excited waiting for this, and I didn't really get to. I had a little bit of problems with contact because she's a very, very, very busy person. But anyway, so we got it done there, and I appreciate that, Shaundra. And I'm going to record this, and others will watch it. And I do find out we have lots of times we have as many or more people watch it after the fact because of time conflict. So thank you very, very much. I do want to mention thank you for everyone that's here. I appreciate it. I'm always a little nervous about how many are going to show up, and we might have 20 or we might have 40. And it always seems to work out real well. Just for your information, we had people from, I counted 8 different states, which I think is really neat. And we kind of started out with just an Oregon FCE thing, and everybody wanted to join the party, and it's been really, really great. I appreciate that. I do need some presenters for every month coming up except April. I have Rebecca Peterson is going to do hers, and then in June, and she's going to do one on. Rebecca, are you still on there?
Yeah, is my mic on?
Yeah, go ahead and tell them what you're going to be doing on in April.
I'm going to give a presentation that will help us prepare our legal documents for like insurance and financial information that we need in 2 different scenarios. One, in case of emergency, and then second, at end of life.
Perfect. And then in June, I just got this today, and I apologize. I don't see that she's still on here, so she can't give it on there. But anyway, it's going to be on cyberbullying cyber security for seniors, and that's Linda in Mississippi is one that there. So I'm looking for some others. I've got a couple others I could do. One is on electric cars. The lesson is written. And if you guys watched the one in Chicago when all those electric cars were stopped, then on that, and the other one I got on the human trafficking. So if anybody's got a preference, they might let me know.
Her name is Leah Holmes from.
Leah Holmes, yes. I just slipped my mind.
She did a great program at our library. She did a really good program at our library.
Okay.
Happening every day.
Okay.
Different.
You want to speak anything else on that, Linda? What you've seen that presentation?
I have, and it's really neat, a good program. Things that we aren't aware of, they're watching. We're being watched.
Okay, and if you guys would like to, if you know of anybody that would like to do it or do it yourself, that would be great. And again, I thank you, Shaundra.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Shaundra.
Thank you, everybody.
Are they going to
Thank
have
you.
a national mid-year Zoom meeting
Yes,
presentation? Okay.
Yes, they are.
we are.
I think that we'll get that information out. I think Judy Fomer, national president, is working on that, and I think you want to say anything about that, Margaret?
It's the titles are all pretty much decided and blurbs are out except for mine. Mine's going to be on public policy and what public policy is. It won't be very long. There's going to be a really fun one that Peggy Martins is going to do. So yeah, we'll get the information out. It is March. Oh, now I gotta look because I'm not sure what the date is. It is March the 18th.
And there'll be two.
It'll be going by Central Time at 1 and then again at 7. So there will be 2 opportunities to join the mid-year.
Okay, with
Good
that,
deal.
unless somebody's got, Shaundra, you got anything else or somebody else, then I'm gonna let people chat a little bit. I'm gonna stop the recording. And if you guys want to chat for a while, y'all leave it open until you guys shut it down.